Last time in this series, I reviewed an episode of TNG that felt like a primetime soap, and this time I'm reviewing an episode that feels like a sensitive drama for grown-ups about feelings and relationships. 30-something in space. Only they aren't really in space very much for this one, so 30-something. Well, not in Picard's case. This is a review of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Family. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know why Picard's friend Lewis is trying to raise the ocean floor, don't worry, that's never specifically addressed. But all the same, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. You know, they say you can't go home again, but I think what they really meant was if you're a human character on Star Trek, you can't go home very often, because that's not really the premise of the show. Obviously, you can go home again. It's possible. They do it in this episode. Here, let me tell you about it. The Enterprise has returned to Earth and is docked for repairs following all that business with the Borg. This is the first episode after the Best of Both Worlds, by the way. Riker meets with Worf about the ongoing upgrades to the ship's weapon systems. Then, as Worf is walking out, Riker's like, "Oh, hey, by the way, looking forward to meeting your parents when they come aboard." Worf's like, "Say what now?" Worf's not thrilled to see his parents. This is during the period of the show when he's been dishonored by the Klingon Empire, and this will be the first time he's seen his parents since that happened, and he's kind of touchy about it. But, hey, they're on the visitors list. What's he gonna do? Hide in his room the whole time they're here? That's not very Klingon. He could just say he already made other plans, and that next time they should call and make sure he's available before they decide to just drop in. I've done that to get out of hanging out with my parents a lot. It works. The best part is if you do it enough, eventually they stop asking, which is great because, whenever you actually want to spend time with them, they're always going to be there. We drop in on Captain Picard in his quarters, where he's just trying to finish packing for his trip to Earth, but Counselor Troi is still up his ass about how he needs to deal with his lingering Borg-related trauma. Picard's like, "Will you relax? That was last week. I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's back to normal. I'm going to Earth to spend a few days with my family at our estate in France because we're here and it's been a while. Not because I'm still deeply and perhaps irreparably broken inside. I'm home and I just want to see my older brother who I hate. Is that all right?" Okay. Worf and O'Brien share some uncomfortable small talk while Worf waits for his parents to beam up. O'Brien's like, "I get it. The last time my father visited me on the ship, he sexually harassed a nurse in sickbay." Worf's like, "Wait, what? That's a pretty serious security issue. I was never informed about that." Ha, yeah. Parents, am I right? Worf's parents, Sergei and Helena, beam up, and they are just delightful. I know they're supposed to be human, but are we sure Mom doesn't have some Klingon in the family tree at some point? She's got some serious Gowron eyes going on there. Sergei zeroes in on Chief O'Brien and chats him up, Sergei being a former Starfleet enlisted man himself. O'Brien calls him Sir, and Sergei waves that off and says, "Don't call me Sir. I used to work for a living," which I think is my favorite line in the episode. Down on Earth, Picard is walking to his family home when he runs into his nephew, Rene, on the road. They have a cute exchange where Rene calls Picard his nephew, so Picard calls Rene his uncle, and that becomes their thing for the rest of the episode. Also, Rene's like, "You don't seem nearly as much of an insufferable piece of shit as Father is always saying." Picard's like, "Hey, thanks." They reach the house. Picard is greeted by his brother's wife, Marie, whom he's never met in person. She seems nice. Then he heads out into the vineyard to find his brother, Robert, who completely no-sells Picard's arrival, acting barely interested in his presence, telling him, "Dinner's at 8, then turning back to working on a vine. He seems nice too. Meanwhile, back on the Enterprise, Dr. Crusher receives a trunk full of her dead husband's shit that she's been keeping on Earth in a storage unit. One of the items in the trunk is a recording he made for Wesley not long after Wesley was born. She's never watched it. She wants to give it to Wesley, but she's not sure if she should. Counselor Troi is there, and she's like, "Oh shit, Beverly, who are we kidding? Just give the thing to Wesley so we can have that scene later on." In engineering, Geordi is showing Worf's parents around. Sergei is fascinated, having worked in engineering during his career. They also share a story about how when Worf was a 7-year-old kid, he beat up 5 teenagers all by himself, which Worf seems embarrassed by, and that just goes to show how modest he is, because if I had done that, I'd never stop telling that story for the rest of my life. Worf takes Helena to see the Arboretum, while Sergei stays behind to listen to Geordi spout some more technobabble about the warp engines. As soon as Worf is out of earshot, Sergei's like, yeah, the dilithium recrystallization process. Shut up, I want to ask you a question. Sure, go ahead. Do you think if I lost the accent I could play Orson Welles? From later in his life, I mean, when he gained the weight and grew the beard. I'm not sure I could nail the voice, but physically I'm at least in the ballpark, yes? Maybe not for a theatrical feature, but at least for, like, a TV movie. Like if CBS ever did a movie of the week about the War of the Worlds broadcast, and they needed someone to play the older Wells who was narrating the story. They could use him appearing on the Dick Cavett show in the 1970s as a framing device. I've got it all worked out. I even wrote a treatment. Would you like to read it? I'm actually kind of busy. Oh, okay. Well, then can I ask you about my son instead? Back at Chateau Picard, the family is having supper, and they do a bit of a characterization speedrun with Picard and Robert to set up the rest of the episode for them. Robert is Mr. Tradition. He doesn't want replicators in the house. He likes the old ways. He thinks life has become too convenient. And Picard is Mr. Progress. Doesn't see why advancing technology and preserving heritage can't go hand in hand. Marie tells Picard that the mayor of the village wants to have a parade for him, but Picard immediately shuts it down, which Robert takes as false modesty. Renee is interested in outer space and starships, which Picard encourages, which prompts Robert to tell him, hey, mind your own damn business and let me raise my kid the way I want. He ain't gonna be no spaceship jockey. He's gonna be a grape farmer like the old man. The next day, Picard meets with Louis, an old friend who is now a supervisor on a project to raise a section of the ocean floor for some reason. Picard's been following the progress of this venture, and he finds it intriguing. Louis latches on to that glimmer of interest and is like, do you want to abandon your career in Starfleet and move back to Earth and become director of the project? Picard's like, no! Well, maybe. Worf is with his parents in 10 Forward when he's called away for something. Sergei and Helena are clearly worried about how Worf is coping with the whole dishonored by his people thing, but they wonder if maybe they just shouldn't mention it since Worf seems uncomfortable with the subject. Guinan walks up and introduces herself. They chat about Worf. Sergei and Helena talk about how difficult it was for them as humans to raise little Worf, who was only interested in Klingon stuff. Guinan says, yeah, well, it might have been difficult, but you got through it. Sergei says, we had to let him explore his heritage for himself and find his own path. Guinan says, so many parents could learn so much from you two. Right? Sergei and Helena drop in on Worf in his quarters, and they finally mention his Klingon dishonor. Worf's like, nope, not talking about it. I have to bear my dishonor alone. But his mom is like, look, we don't understand all the Klingon stuff, but we know this. You're suffering. And when you're suffering, we're suffering. And you need to always remember that no matter what's going on, we're here for you. You're not alone. Sergei says, we're proud of you, and we love you. Sorry, my eyes are watering all of a sudden. Does anyone know what the pollen count is? Louis gets a little pushy with Picard about this ocean floor project, telling Picard he's taken the liberty of setting up a meeting with the Board of Governors. At first, Picard's upset. He tells Louis, I didn't ask you to do that. I never said I was actually interested. But Louis talks him into at least taking the meeting, seeing what the board has to say. So Picard agrees, and then grabs a bottle of wine and starts getting drunk. Robert walks in like, hey, take it easy on the wine. That stuff doesn't grow on trees. Ha! While you're here, let me ask you something. What did those Borg do to you up there? Picard says, you know what happened. Robert says, not exactly. I got the general sense of it, but, like, did they put stuff up your butt? Or in your pee hole? Because while I'm sure it wasn't fun for you, if they didn't put anything up your butt or in your pee hole, I really don't see the big deal. Picard gets up and walks away, but Robert follows him outside. Picard says, I'm tired of fighting with you, Robert. And Robert is like, yes, you seem tired of a lot of things lately. Tired of the Enterprise, too? That's why you're thinking of leaving Starfleet and plunging under the sea with Louis? Settling for less? You never settled for less before. Class president, valedictorian, athletic hero. Picard's like, were you so jealous? And Robert says, yes! I was the older brother, but I was always your older brother. You were the big shot. You got all the cheers, and you broke all the rules while I had to be the responsible one. I had to look after you. And you know, I think that's why you really came back here. You wanted me to look after you again. Picard's like, oh, fuck you. And he punches him, and the brother fight is on. They crash through a row of vines and roll around in the mud, and pretty soon, they're laughing at the whole mess. But then, Picard's laughter turns to something more serious. And he says, you don't know. They took everything I was. They used me to kill, and I tried to stop them, but I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough. I should have been. I should have been able to stop them. Robert softens toward his brother and says, you're going to have to learn to live with this, Jean-Luc. The choice you have is where. Under the sea with Louis, or above the clouds with the Enterprise. That puts things in perspective for Picard, and he and Robert embrace and head back to the house to track mud all over and get even drunker. When Marie walks in and finds them, Picard announces that he's going to return to the Enterprise. That's where he belongs. And if he ever doubts that again, all he has to do is come back here. Bit of a backhanded compliment, if you think about it. Also, I can't help but notice that in the last episode I reviewed, The Icarus Factor, Riker and his dad have a fight, which fixes their relationship. And in this episode, Picard and his brother have a fight, which fixes their relationship. Once again, violence is the answer. It makes everything better. That is the message of Star Trek. On the Enterprise, Wesley finally watches the recording of his father. The holographic Jack Crusher appears like, good morning, son. I am a bird wearing a red polyester shirt. Come on, where are my Ben Folds fans at? I changed one word to make it fit better, but you should know that one. Jack Crusher talks about how he hopes he doesn't make too many mistakes while Wesley grows up, and that Wesley doesn't resent him for being away so often. Jack says he sees himself in Wesley. He's like, and you're so much like me. I'm sorry. Not Ben Folds 5. I'm dipping into that solo repertoire. It was released as a single, but received a little radio play and did not chart. I think it was used in an episode of Scrubs, but I'm not sure because I did not watch that show. Anybody? Where my Foldsters at? Hollow Jack tells Wesley that he'll always be a part of him and hopes what he's had to say makes sense. And if not, he'll do better next time. I think I need to change the air filter. Picard bids farewell to Robert, Marie, and Renee. Robert gives him a bottle of the terrible family wine and says, don't drink it all at once and try not to drink it alone. And they embrace. Back on the Enterprise, Worf is walking his parents to the transporter room for their goodbye just as Picard is getting back. They meet briefly in the corridor, and Worf and Helena usher Sergei onto the transporter pad before he can talk his way into getting a personal tour from the captain. Picard chuckles like, family. Am I right, folks? Before we go, we check in one last time with Robert and family. It's after dark, and Marie is looking out the window. She says, Renee's still out there, dreaming of starships and adventures. It's getting late. Robert walks up to gently pull her from the window, saying, yes, but let him dream. We cut to little Renee sitting under a tree, gazing up at the sky. He seems like a good kid, doesn't he? Don't get attached. The end. So, I am not going to try and keep you in suspense as to my opinion of this one. This is a fantastic episode, one of TNG's very best. What I really admire about it is the way it's able to be both a refreshing change of pace from the usual tone and rhythm of the show and a perfect follow-up to the best of both worlds, which exemplifies that usual tone and rhythm better than almost anything else in the show. Family is also a rare example of TNG acknowledging the impact of the events of previous episodes on its characters. Because of its scrupulously episodic structure, most of the time, once a TNG show is over, it's over, and its events are never mentioned again. Among the few exceptions to this rule are when recurring characters reappear, like when Q shows up, and there's a line of dialogue referring to what happened in his last episode to remind regular viewers and provide some minimal context for more casual watchers who might be seeing this character for the first time. Almost any other time, it doesn't matter how traumatic the events of the episode are. Picard is tortured, Worf is paralyzed, Troy is psychically assaulted, Data goes nuts and takes over the ship, Riker just goes nuts, Beverly almost quit Starfleet to go live in her dead grandma's house and fuck her dead grandma's boyfriend, who turns out to be a ghost who lives in a candle. Whatever it is, once the episode is over, the story is over, and the show moves on. Which is usually fine, by the way. I like an episodic format. I think a TV series should be episodic, and each episode should have its own self-contained story. One of the reasons I could never seriously get into soap operas, despite my general love for the delightfully melodramatic, over-the-top absurdities they contain, is their highly serialized format, which makes it feel like no story ever ends. Everything just keeps getting dragged out on and on forever. Many modern streaming shows have this same problem. The season is written so that each episode doesn't feel like an individual story within a larger story, but an incomplete fragment of a story that's been chopped up into smaller pieces. When you finally get to a point where things start to pay off, it can often fall flat because you've been waiting so long to see the payoff that you no longer even care what it is. TNG doesn't have that problem. But making things too episodic can create its own problems. Structuring a series so that its episodes each tell their own complete stories is a good way to go, but it is still a series with regular characters and settings that continue from week to week. You don't want the episodes to feel so isolated from one another that it seems like what happens in them doesn't matter to the characters at all. That was one of my big problems with Star Trek Voyager. Nothing that happened in any of the episodes seemed to make any difference to anyone. You want if you're smart, you want a series to be episodic, but to also have just enough connective tissue between the episodes so that it feels like the events of the episodes really happened in the lives of the characters, that the experiences we see these people going through matter to them and affect them. Deep Space Nine was great at this. TNG didn't do it very often, but it does it with this episode, Family, and the result is also something great. In some ways, Family is an epilogue to Best of Both Worlds, but it's much more than that as well. It's a kind of bridge between Best of Both Worlds and the rest of the series. Watching Captain Picard cross that bridge makes for some truly compelling television. There's only one big actor showcase scene when Picard finally breaks down after his fight with Robert, but Patrick Stewart does some of his best work in the series by finding more understated ways of showing us the uncertainty, conflict, and pain Picard is still living with in the aftermath of his abduction by the Borg. He insists that he's fine. Of course he does. He's Picard, independent, in control Picard. But Counselor Troy doesn't buy that, and neither should we. Picard tries to tell her that his visit to the family home has nothing to do with his experience with the Borg, but it's been 20 years since he last saw his brother. Surely, he's been back to Earth once or twice in all that time. He finally decides to visit Robert now? It's not a coincidence, no matter how much Picard insists otherwise. Picard deals with some complicated stuff in this episode, and Patrick Stewart handles it effortlessly. As an actor, he's often a bit broad. Don't let the accent and the resume full of Shakespeare fool you. He's just as much of a ham in his own way as Shatner. But he's also capable of amazing subtlety. I love how he plays Picard's reaction to Lewis setting a meeting with the board of the Atlantis Project. Picard is extremely defensive at the mere suggestion that he might want to leave the Enterprise. He's like, I never said that. There's no prospect of me taking the job. But clearly he doth protest too much. Picard is interested in Lewis's offer, at least a little bit, and his insistent pushback is because he's grappling with the realization that he wants something he didn't expect to want. That's a really interesting position to push Picard to. Even though logically we know that he's eventually going to choose to remain on the Enterprise, we as fans are so used to thinking of the Enterprise as the center of the universe. Why would anyone ever consider leaving it? That the idea Picard would even consider doing something else is provocative and serves to underline how unsettling his abduction by the Borg truly was. The relationship between Picard and his brother Robert forms the emotional heart of the episode, and watching it this time, I was impressed by how little screen time they actually have together. It's just a few scenes, really. A handful of brief exchanges between them leading up to that big argument and fight near the end. But in those few scenes, we get a full picture of these two men and their animosity toward one another, but also of the love that exists, unspoken beneath it all. Robert is my favorite one-off character in the series, possibly in the entire Trek franchise. He's one of the most authentically human characters in the show. I've known people just like him, men usually, with a deep well of feelings which they will not or cannot express. Stoic, quiet, aloof, but obviously with a lot going on behind the eyes. But Robert isn't one-dimensional. Sure, he's stern and cold, but he also comes across as a loving and attentive husband. One of the few expressions of unashamed emotion we see from him is when he compliments his wife Marie on how delicious their soup is at supper. And by the end of the episode, he's even opened up a bit. He seems more understanding of his son's dreams of, as Marie puts it, starships and adventures. Jeremy Kemp plays Robert, and it's a wonderful performance. I've never seen anyone come across so convincingly as simultaneously English and French, for one thing. His look, his delivery, his body language, the way he follows Picard outside with his hands clasped behind him, his shoulders thrown back, looking more like a military man than his Starfleet officer brother, projecting his devotion to rules and tradition and what he sees as the right way of doing things. Everything about the performance feels carefully considered, but also totally natural and effortless. I love the moments when Kemp lets Robert's mask slip, when he confesses his jealousy and resentment to his brother. And in this beautiful moment during their farewell, when he embraces Jean-Luc, and we can read his true feelings, a lifetime of unexpressed sorrow and love written all over his expressive face, where nobody but us can see it. Patrick Stewart's performance of Picard's weeping, "I should have been able to stop them" speech is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but I think this brief shot of Robert's silent face as he clutches his little brother tight is just as powerful and says just as much. I could go on and on about Picard's part of the episode, but I don't want to ignore the Worf plot either. I call it the Worf plot out of habit, but really it's not much of a plot. And that's a good thing in this case. Part of what makes this such a singular, memorable episode is that it is truly a character-driven story. There's no crisis, there's no Star Trek thing out in space threatening the ship. It's an episode about exactly what it says in the title: family. And part of family, as Worf is reminded, is supporting each other unconditionally in times of need. Worf's pain is less recent than Picard's. His honor was stripped from him midway through season 3 in an episode that originally aired about 6 months before this one, but that pain is no less present in Worf's life. This episode doesn't go into details about that situation. The details don't matter here. If you saw that earlier episode, you know what the deal is. If you didn't see it, all you need to know is that Worf has been made an outcast from his fellow Klingons. It's a source of great shame to him, and it's a burden he's determined to carry alone. Despite my joke earlier about avoiding having to spend time with them, I was fortunate to have parents who were present and supportive of me growing up. Not everyone can say that, unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to think of what it must be like to go through life with parents who make no effort to understand you and who don't accept you for who you are. That line from Guinan about how so many parents could learn so much from Sergei and Helena is thuddingly obvious, but god damn if it doesn't hit like a freight train when I watch this episode now. When Sergei talks about letting Worf discover who he was and follow his own path, and when Helena and Sergei both tell Worf, we don't understand everything about what's going on with you, but we don't need to. We're here for you. We're proud of you. We love you. I can't help but think of all the people I know whose parents failed to clear that very, very low bar. Queer kids, kids with autism, kids who just grew up thinking or believing differently than their parents, who didn't have that kind of support and acceptance. How much better would the world be? How much happier and warmer a place would it be for so many people if there were more parents in it, like Sergei and Helena? Then there's Wesley's mini story about his dad's hologram. Out of everything in the episode, this is the only bit that does feel like filler, or if not filler, maybe just obligatory. They didn't want it to be just a Picard and Worf episode. They wanted to broaden the family concept a little further, and so they shoehorned Wesley and his dead dad in there as well. Having said that, I'm not complaining too hard, because the scene where Wesley watches the recording of his dad in the holodeck is very well done. Jack Crusher's speech is very well written, with enough notes that are bittersweet without being too obvious. Wesley's reaction at the end always gets me. He rushes forward to touch his father just as the recording ends and the hologram disappears. He wants to connect with his father, but it's too late. His father is gone. Sure, logically you could say, why doesn't Wesley just watch it again? But that would miss the point emotionally of the scene. Plus, think about where Wesley's head must be at. He's never seen this before. He barely remembers his father, and now there he is, standing in front of him, completely realistic and convincing, talking to him like he's still alive. Think how jarring that must be for someone in Wesley's situation. Think how having access to these kinds of fully lifelike holograms must fuck people up. Family was written by Ronald D. Moore, who wrote or co-wrote over 24 TNG episodes, including Sins of the Father, the episode where Worf's honor is stripped, beloved series high points like Yesterday's Enterprise and Relics, as well as some of my personal favorites like Chain of Command, Tapestry, and the series finale, All Good Things. He also co-wrote the first 2 movies featuring the TNG cast. Suzanne Lambdin and Brian Stewart also get a based on credit because the bit about Wesley watching a holographic message from his father was taken from a spec script they wrote. The episode was directed by Les Landau, who directed dozens of TNG episodes throughout the show's run and who makes very good use here of the locations used to represent the Picard family estate. I love this long tracking shot that picks up Robert and Jean-Luc in the background as they leave the house prior to their fight and pulls them as they walk over to the vineyard, talking the whole way. And speaking of their fight, I've always really liked the detail of Picard tackling Robert and knocking over a row of vines. That's how you know shit's getting real when they start fucking up the grapes. It's not only a beautifully written and directed and acted episode, its cast also includes 2 Oscar nominees. Theodore Bikel, who plays Sergei, was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for The Defiant Ones, and Samantha Eggar, who plays Marie, and who just passed away last month, as it happens, was nominated for Best Actress for The Collector, a fantastic and chilling film also starring Terrence Stamp. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. Despite all of that, Family was the lowest rated episode of the season, which just shows you that people don't know what's good. Then again, maybe that's unfair. This was probably a tough episode to market. I don't remember the teaser for it, but I imagine it went something like, Captain Picard visits his brother to deal with lingering PTSD, while on the Enterprise, Worf hangs out with his extremely Russian mom and dad. Next time on an all-new Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'd watch it. And I did. And I loved it. Those are my thoughts on Family. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would. If you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of reviews of episodes centered on family matters continues. We're going to shift focus from Star Trek The Next Generation to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because how could I do a series of reviews of Trek family shows without looking at a Ben and Jake Sisko father-son story? My subject next time will be the Season 3 DS9 episode, Explorers. See you next time for that one. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.